The next show I got to work on for him was called Interstellar. And this was somewhat different for us. Well, maybe not that different, but by this time, we'd worked with him several times, and so he'd asked us to work on Interstellar, and in this case, I sort of jokingly say we put the inter in Interstellar in that we built the spaceships and photographed those spaceship models that are so integral to telling the story. Show of hands again. How many people have seen Interstellar? All right. Excellent. One of the nice things we got to do on Interstellar was actually get involved very early on and help in the design process of the spaceships. The main spaceship was called the Endurance, and it's circular and spins to create gravity. And then attached to the Endurance are smaller spaceships called Rangers and Landers. So the Rangers are the sort of sleek sports car-looking spaceships, and then Landers are the more blocky, sort of utilitarian truck-like spaceships. And we gotten some designs, some initial looks of the spaceships from the art department. And we also got some designs of the Ranger with all the detail on it. And we took those designs and again created a preliminary CG model. So here is the Endurance as a CG model. Very simple, but as a good for us as a guide. And here are the Lander and Ranger. And we took those CG models and added lots of detail to them in terms of adding scribe lines and thrusters and rockets and things like that. And then because we wanted to make them exactly as the art director, production designer Nathan Crowley had asked us to, we involved ourselves in a lot of, I would say, modern manufacturing techniques. And one of the things we did was a lot of 3D printing. So we actually would use 3D printing to create details, and we also used CNC to create the bodies. And we took the CG parts, again, in the 3D world, created the rapid prototyped printed details, added those details to the model, and here we are building the Endurance itself. Sort of an assembly line process, but we're adding all those little 3D printed parts to the Endurance here. And here we are building more of the model. This took this was photographed on a Friday. I know that because that's when I wear a colorful Hawaiian shirt. So just so you know. That's John Faber, who was the lead model maker on the Endurance itself. Now, the Endurance for most of the shots was in 1/15th scale, so it was 15 times smaller than a full-size spaceship would be. We built it with a steel frame and then clad it with these lightweight plastic shells, and then on the plastic shells we added all that detail. And here's a demonstration of how we built the Ranger spaceship. The Ranger, again, was built in 15th scale. We started with a pattern, which is on the upper left. We added those 3D printed details on the lower left, which is like a thruster or something like that. We then created a mold, and from that mold, we were able to cast lightweight fiberglass bodies, which as you see on the lower right. That allowed us to build two of the Rangers and two of the Landers, and also meant that they were lightweight, so we could stick them onto the Endurance model. And here we are taking one of the Rangers and attaching it to the Endurance. And this, again, is a time-lapse showing us building the miniatures. And again, these are the 15th scale models, and these were photographed motion control, which meant that we would set them up on our stage and shoot them with a camera that could be controlled with a computer that allowed us to repeat the motion on the model. And so the motion control camera is on the right. It's that big tower, and it's got a boom on it, and it's got a camera on the end of it. And for the most part, most of the shots in Interstellar that involved the spaceship involved our miniature and shot with this motion control camera. And we would shoot it with a beauty light, which would be the main light, which is the sun, and a little bit of fill light. And then we put practical lights that were on board. Any actual light that was on the spaceship would actually be a physical light on the model. And we shot those all together. And normally when you would shoot something like this, you might shoot them separately. You might shoot the beauty light separately, the fill light separately, and the practical light separately. And Christopher Nolan asked us specifically to light and shoot everything as one. And again, this goes back to his striving to make it look real, in that he said, well, if we sort of suggested that if we're going to shoot this model, let's shoot everything as if we were shooting it like we were shooting a documentary. If we were actually there in space and we had to shoot this spaceship, where would we put the camera? We would put the camera, we would attach it to the spaceship, or we would be in another spaceship looking at it. So we'd always be in very close proximation to the spaceship when it was being photographed, so that it appeared to be documentary photography, and it helped sell the idea that it was real. So that was, again, part of a creative decision to help make the miniature just integral to the telling of the story. One other thing was that the design of the spaceships was based on taking NASA and the International Space Station and looking at that for reference. So the windows on the Rangers, for instance, and the heat tiles on it and all the other details that are on it look like they were from the space shuttle. It's not the same shape, but you're familiar with the shapes of the details, and so it feels real when you look at it. It feels believable. It doesn't feel fantastic. And he wanted to make sure that the spaceship felt very familiar and it supported the characters and what they were doing, and didn't draw attention to itself, but actually became another part of the storytelling. Imagine you're making a movie about Columbus, and so he's going to get on board a sailing ship and travel across the Atlantic. Well, we wanted to do the same thing with the spaceship models. We wanted to make them appear to be contemporary and realistic to the era that the characters are in, so that you believe what you're seeing. It doesn't distract you from the storytelling, and then you are able to keep up with the story. So we've shot our 15th scale model. We shot that for quite a while, motion control. But there's a scene in the film where there's a character named Dr. Mann, and he manages not to dock his spaceship very well into the Endurance, the big spaceship. And so for that scene, we get to go back to what we love to do best, which is build models and then blow them up. So in that particular case, we had to build a larger version of the Ranger. And so this is 1/5 scale. It's much bigger than the smaller models were. And that's so when we blow it up, we can see these realistic destruction and pieces breaking apart. This is a shot of the Ranger. It's, again, built of foil and resin, so it's very lightweight and very fragile. That is a guy named Doug Ziegler. He is a pyrotechnician. He is very calm. That model is full of explosives in this particular case, but he seems to be handling it pretty well. He would be the only guy at this stage who would be operating on the model because it's full of explosives. Here's the same model before we put explosives in it, where we're adding the floor and the windows. But we added a lot of detail. And again, the nice thing is, since we started with a CG model and we used CNC and laser cutting and 3D printing to create this first model in 15th scale, we used all those same techniques to create the 5th scale models. So we just changed the scale on the machine, so to speak, and we're able to recreate them in a much larger scale. And that way, the miniature in 15th and the miniature in 5th and the full-size set that they built of the Ranger would all match in detail. That way, we're able to intercut from one to the other without losing continuity. Here we are building larger scale pieces of the Endurance. This is where this will attach the Ranger to that when it blows up. And we made duplicates for scenes where where parts of the Endurance explode when the Ranger blows up. There's some giant engine bells there. Those were kind of cool to make. This is an airlock that was used. Again, the Ranger spaceship gets attached to this airlock, and the airlock itself was made of breakaway material, so when the Ranger explodes, so does the airlock. We also needed to create something that was not seen very often, which is an explosion in space. And the trick there is that if something explodes in space, you don't have oxygen, you don't have an atmosphere, so the explosion has to appear very quickly and then dissipate and disappear. And so we had to come up with a way to make that explosion appear, to look exciting, and then continue the force of the blast without the flame. So in this particular case, my pyrotechnician's name was Richie Helmer, and Richie's been around for a long time. Richie worked on Jaws, and he blew up the jungles in Apocalypse Now. So he's really familiar with creating explosions. He's a very creative person, and he came up with a solution, which was to make these explosions appear very quickly and then burn out very quickly. And then to keep the debris moving, he used air. So you first see an explosion, which is flame. The flame burns out, and then the air continues to push the debris. So those are some of the tests that Richie did with some breakaway test pieces just to get this look down for the explosion. We then took the model outside, as we often do, and hung it. Now, if you were shooting a spaceship in space and you were to shoot it conventionally with the camera pointed horizontally and the spaceship horizontally, as soon as it blew up, all the debris would fall down, and it would give away the illusion of it being on the ground and not in space. But we actually took advantage of gravity in this case, and if you look in the right-hand picture, you'll see the camera is actually below the model. So we hung the model from a crane in the air, upside down at an angle, and then put the cameras looking straight up at it so that when it blew up, the debris wouldn't fall down to the camera, it would fall at the camera and appear to be weightless. And that's actually what we call a zero gravity shot, where in fact we're, like I said, using gravity as an advantage in this case. And here we are setting it up outside. We basically used the night sky as our background. And here's a nice shot showing the model outside before we shoot it. That is the sun, which is a 20K light, HMI light that's lighting it. One other thing that we needed to do on this show was, again, Chris believes in shooting things for real as much as possible, and he wanted an effect of Matthew McConaughey's character, Cooper, when he enters this black hole. He wanted to see the effect of all this debris that's been colliding with the black hole and falling into it, and give a sense of a horizon. And so what we came up with from his suggestion was something as simple as pouring salt down on the camera. And it seems like a very simple idea, but it actually created some really amazing wave patterns, and shooting it at high speed, it created this sort of gossamer feel that you wouldn't get from doing it strictly as a CG version. So this very organic, very simple technique became very ethereal, actually, the way it was ultimately put together in the film. And that's us taking our Ranger model and shooting that pointing straight up, camera looking up, and then above that we would pour the salt on it. So that all was fine and dandy, and we loved the model, and it looked great. And then came the fateful day where we had to blow it up. So we got to, again, hang it outside in night, and then put our camera below it. and photograph it as it comes apart. And this is a witness camera showing what happened at normal speed, not at high speed, but you get a sense of what occurs. And even at that angle, you can kind of get a sense of what happens with all that debris flying at you as opposed to across from you. By the way, that was the applause of my crew. Again, nothing gives you better satisfaction than to spend, again, about 14 weeks building a model and then blow it up in front of a bunch of people who worked day and night on it. It's pretty exciting. One of the things about this shot, this is in the movie, by the way. This is the first time we shot this miniature. We built two of them so we could get another crack at it. And in one of the pre-visualizations that Christopher Nolan had created for the film, the camera is actually attached to the nose of the Ranger when it blows up. Well, the Ranger's blowing up, so we couldn't attach the camera to it, so we did the next best thing, which was to put the camera on a crane and follow it as it explodes. And he liked the shot well enough, and he had it in the can, so to speak. But then he said, well, can't you attach the camera to the nose of the spaceship when it blows up? And we said, but it's blowing up. It physically is exploding. He says, yeah, but can't you put the camera on it like in the previs so that it exactly matches what's in the previs, so we see the camera moving with the spaceship as it explodes? And I kept saying, but, well, I shouldn't say I said anything. I was nodding a lot. And he expressed to Paul Franklin, he says, put the camera on the spaceship, and when the spaceship explodes, let the camera be on there. So we had to figure out a way to do that because the camera has to shoot the shot of the exploding spaceship, but it's attached to the spaceship that is exploding. So how do you do that? Well, we came up with a method we called the Pelicam. We took something called a Pelican case, which is a big plastic camera case. It's very durable. We cut a hole in it, put our camera in there, and attached our camera to the nose of the spaceship. But we were using an explosive timer so we could make the spaceship explode at a certain specific time when we did the shot. And we attached the camera in that case on its own explosive bolt with a cable on it. So at a specific time in the shot, while the ship is swinging, but before it actually blows up, we were able to cut the camera away and pull it out of the shot and save the camera, which was good because the camera itself was what we call a VistaVision camera. Now, a VistaVision camera is a film camera. If you're not familiar with it, it's normal film cameras. The film runs through vertically, and you get 4 perfs. You get like a little negative out of it. Because this scene was going to be in the film and it was going to be in IMAX, we needed a larger negative, and so we needed to photograph it with a camera that gave us a larger negative. So we used something called the VistaVision camera, where the film runs sideways through the camera and creates a much bigger negative that can be blown up in Vista. And but these cameras haven't been used since, well, they haven't been built since the 50s. We had one that was refurbished since then, but I can kind of imagine that this camera was actually used on the 10 Commandments, and we're sticking it in this box and we're about to blow it up. So we had to figure out a way to save that camera. Anyway, Interstellar was, like, for me, a really great sort of culmination of working with Christopher Nolan, in that we were much more involved in this film than we had been in previous films of his. We certainly enjoyed the work we did on the 2 Dark Knight movies and on Inception. But in this case, in Interstellar, we were actually creating a pretty significant part of the location, in that we built the spaceship whenever you see it as an exterior. And we also were involved very heavily with the design of the spaceship, the Endurance, with the art department. And creatively, it got much more involved for us. When we started the film, Paul Franklin, the supervisor from Double Negative, who was ultimately going to put the scene together, or all the scenes together, started out with the thought that there would be a ratio of, he thought maybe 60% of the shots would be miniature and 40% of the shots would be CG, or it may have been actually 40% miniature and 60% CG. He came into it with that expectation. But as we continued to shoot the model more and more, the ratio started changing, and we ended up doing something like 90% of the shots are miniature and 10% of the shots ended up being CG. He used CG specifically for things like entering the atmosphere and wide shots. But for the most part, throughout the film, whenever you see the Endurance spaceship in space, it's going to be our miniature, photographed and then composited into backgrounds. By the way, in this day and age when there's so much done with green screens in movies where you have a very little bit of a set and you have green screens outside and it's ultimately all replaced with some sort of digital environment. Interstellar is I don't know if it's notorious or infamous or just amazing in this day and age. There are no green screens in the movie. Basically, they photographed everything as much as they could in camera. They went to locations like Iceland. Whenever you see anything out the window of the spaceship, there were projectors on stage projecting space or planets for the actors to react to. When we photographed our models, we shot them all against black. We would shoot a separate pass where we lit the model bright enough to create a matte, but we never put a green screen behind it. This, again, really created a very great sense of sort of a documentary feel because we were getting pure photography that then could be combined with the backgrounds. And in this case, for Interstellar, the miniatures served their purpose, which was to create this sort of grounded reality of Earth. And then that combined with the incredible CG work that was done by Double Negative to create the black hole and the wormhole. Black hole especially, to me, was really well done. It's a great combination of techniques to sell the story and tell the story as Christopher Nolan envisioned it. So here is an example of some of the work from, I can't show you everything that we did on Interstellar, but here's an example of some of the shots. And that's how you take miniatures and use them with CG to create great illusions. Thank you very much.
はい、皆さん大きな拍手でお願いします。素晴らしいセミナーでしたね。Big hand, Ian Hunter. Well, Ian, thanks for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We've got so many, young creators and filmmakers here. We've got time for one question. Why don't we do one question?
One question,
Yeah.
yes.
How's that? じゃあ、手挙げてください。本当にもう本当に最初に上がった手なのでこちらでもう行きましょう。
One question, so you have to make a good question.
いい質問にしてくださいね。
どうも貴重な講演ありがとうございました。
Thanks for a wonderful seminar.
質問ですけども、はい。今ハリウッドで非常にフル CG の映画が、多いとは思うんですけども、その中で、ノーラン監督は非常にミニチュアの使った撮影にこだわっていまして、今後ハリウッドでそういったフル CG の映画なのか、それともミニチュアを使ったミニチュアをミックスした CG なのか、どっちが盛り上がっていくのか増えていくのか、それとももしくはそれが監督の完全に好みによるものなのか教えていただければと思います。
So right now, it seems like there's just so many films that use all CG, or there's so much CG use. But of course, Director Nolan loves to use miniatures to get that reality. So his basic question is, which way are things going to go now? Obviously, it's up to the directors now, but do you have a sense of, is it going to just keep going with more and more CG, or is something like this going to really affect more and more use of miniatures?
Well, interestingly, I think the really big, high-budget tentpole movies, some of them will still continue to use CG quite a bit. The main difference between using CG and using miniatures is that miniatures require you to pre-plan, and CG allows you to continue to work on the shot till the very end. And so on a really, really big budget superhero movie, the studios can continue to work on them up until the, almost up to release date using CG. These examples that I showed you had directors who were willing to commit to what the vision was going to be. And they would give us very clear direction. And Christopher Nolan is a great example. He tells you exactly what he wants to see. So it requires commitment on the part of the director to use a miniature because he has to understand what he's going to get and tell us what he wants, and then we deliver that. So that's one thing, is that it takes away some of the control of the studio and gives it back to the director to use miniatures. So I think on big tentpole movies, you'll still see quite a bit of CG done, frankly. However, there are some directors and some movies being done where we're doing some of the work as miniatures because it turns out sometimes miniatures are less expensive. For instance, going back to Night of the Museum, someone would say, well, why didn't you just finish the CG version of the interior? Well, it turns out that the amount of time it would take to texture, render, light, and output the CG version of that set, it was actually more expensive to do it as a CG version than for us to go and build it as a miniature. Also, building a miniature oftentimes is faster because you can put more people on it and do things at the same time. So to answer your question, I think you're going to still see quite a bit of digital work done. Probably not as much miniatures as these big tentpole movies as you might expect, but you'll see a lot more miniatures coming in on moderate, medium budget movies because it turns out to be a less expensive option. But it's all about the vision of the director. If the director can commit to what he wants to see, then miniatures become a great option because they are real. We are photographing something and handing it to him.
That would also kind of force the director to really get into the craft of making a film, to commit to that, wouldn't it? So that would actually be a better way for a director to really, grow as an artist instead of relying on CG.
Yeah, that's true. It means that instead of just going onto a set and having a big green screen or back behind there and letting the visual effects company deal with it, it means that they have to visualize what it's going to be ultimately and translate that vision to the artist so they can build to it. And again, some directors have that strength, and I've been in the business long enough to hear people say, how can I visualize it without seeing it? And I'm thinking, but you're a director. That is your job, to visualize it without seeing it. And tell us what that is. So sometimes directors use that as a crutch, that they don't, there's a green screen back there, someone else will figure it out later on. And the better directors can see it in their head and tell the artist what they want to see.
And that's where you come in.
Exactly.
皆さん、大きな拍手でお願いします。Mr. Ian Hunter, such a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much.